How are you all doing? I expected a better Canadian welcome. Uh, how are you all doing? All right. Yeah. As stated, my name is Charles T. Brown. It is a pleasure, an absolute pleasure, to be here. Um, as we work out the technology here for a second, let me see. We did this. We did practice. Don't worry. We practiced. We're gonna see. There we go. We know our stuff. Um, Thank you, Mel. Thank you to the Green Action Center. Thank you to Michelle. Thank you to the entire team that picked me up yesterday from the airport. I showed up dressed like a hip hop artist from the South, but they were still able to recognize me. I was incognito, so I was in my bag, as we say in the South. Um, I'm really honored to be back in Canada. I've spent a lot of time in the country. I've spent time in the British Columbia. I've been to Calgary. I've been to Montreal, Quebec City. Montreal, Quebec City, Nova Scotia, and a few other places. But I'm absolutely honored to be here. I expected mountains and all of that when I arrived. Uh, I don't know. The people on YouTube fooled me. I expected different things, but there is no place better than your own. So thank you. Thank you for being here. So today we're going to talk about equitable cities. And I founded my firm Equitable Cities because, quite frankly, not enough people were talking about the need to center equity in the work that we do. And I said, why not me? We're going to get this right. One second. Why not me? And so this presentation, Equitable Cities, is about how to liberate those caged by our transportation system. And in doing so, I'm going to bring to your attention some of my work around arrested mobility. I want to start by saying I love each and every one of you. It is not an act. I do this work because I'm a Christian, unapologetically. And this work is based upon my love for thy neighbor as thyself. And it's not easy. It's not even easy to speak about faith in my profession, but I do so because I want you to know that the lens that I look through is that lens. I do not think all white people are racist. I do think our systems are, but I do think we've made significant progress towards addressing and mitigating some of those issues. I'm also not anti-police. I'm just against discriminatory policing. I'm against over-policing. And I'm against anything that prevents someone from becoming their full selves. Now that that's out of the way, I want to introduce you to the younger me. Look at how handsome that guy was. That guy, though still shy, that's little Charles that couldn't go anywhere without his teddy bear. I wanted that teddy bear with me because I don't really like taking pictures. And so this little guy would go with me everywhere that I went. I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but he knew one day I would be standing before a podium such as this. So wherever you're at, Teddy, thank you. I can now stand on my own. I identify as a street level researcher and a pracademic. The reason why I identify as a street level researcher, because I think the answers to many of the questions that we ask ourselves are found in the streets among the people. We simply need to go to them because they are the experts. I'm a pracademic because I don't think our academies have all the answers. I think you need to practice as well as have theory. I was fortunate to be able to do both, so I spend my time as a pracademic. But notice I put practitioner first. I was reared in a really small town called Sugar Lock, Mississippi, as in hand me some sugar or give me some sugar and lock your door. Not lock your door because it's dangerous, but simply to illustrate how we pronunciate Sugar Lock, as in Sugar Lock. But it's actually Shaquela. It's Shaquela because it's formerly, still is, I should say, though not in terms of the paperwork. It's where the Choctaw Nation is, and was and is. It's close to Philadelphia, Mississippi, where you can find the Choctaw people still very much there to this day. And so I share with you where I'm from because I'm from a town of less than 500 people. It's actually 350 people, except when my cousins from Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, and other places visit, then we get up around 500 to 600 people. So if you want to attend at its peak, come to Sugarlock Day or come around the 4th of July. And so I also share that because that's where my value system comes from. It's where my father's buried. It's where my mother lives to this day, and many of my other closest family members. So Sugarlock, Mississippi. Sugarlock, you've made it to Canada. So I say all of that, of course, because I live by the African proverb, I am because we are. So again, thanks for being here. Now let's get to the heart of the presentation. What is equity? Well, equity refers to the fair distribution of resources and opportunities, and that is regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or other characteristics. Equity is also, or the goal of it, is to ensure that everyone has an equal chance to succeed. Notice that I emphasize the need to talk about everyone. I do that because equity has been weaponized and politicized to have us think socially or social-politically about only one or a few groups of people. Truly, though, equity in its aggregate is about everyone. When we talk about equity, one way to look at it in its simplest form is to know that equity involves trying to understand and give people what they need to live or to enjoy full, healthy lives. No matter where I go around the world, when I state that, people are in agreement when it comes to what equity is. However, when you dig a little deeper and you press people for more, you state, well, equity is not just that. Equity is also the presence of justice and fairness within the procedures, the processes, and more importantly, the distribution of resources by institutions and or systems. At that point, people say, okay, Charles or Charlie Brown, hold up, you're going too far. And what do? I go further. I say, see, facing equity issues is not just this buzzword. It requires from you an understanding of the underlying or root causes of inequities or inequalities and the oppression within our society. So if you are practicing equity or aiming or that's your goal, understand that it requires that you understand what the root causes are. And as you explore these root causes in terms of equity in the aggregate, without exception, it leads you towards an understanding of the need for more racial and ethnic equity. And what is racial or ethnic equity? It's about then transforming the behaviors, the institutions, and the systems that ultimately harm people of color. See, it's also about increasing access to that power, which scares a lot of people, redistributing and providing additional resources, and ultimately eliminating barriers. What it is not about excluding other marginalized groups. Because equity, racial and ethnic equity, understands that intersectionality is important. And so at Rutgers University, when I have an opportunity to teach there, during my first class, many students who are aspiring to be engineers or planners, they're in graduate school, they say, I want to do this work to transform communities. And so I showed them this photo, and I'm showing you this photo. This is not just a keynote, this is a class. The question I'm going to ask you is, in this photo, which could be here in Winnipeg, I've gone through communities that look exactly like this. I was out all last night. Thankfully, you started here today at noon, or otherwise, I would have been a little late. But I believe in seeing, feeling, witnessing, and talking to people. So the question to all the experts that are here now, as you look at this picture, I want you to yell out in your Canadian way. What would you change? Keep going. I only got so much time. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. All right. You all heard it. What you just witnessed is what I hear around the country. No, around the world. He added street art at the end, like that was going to be the final answer. Like that's You just really continued. Thank you. Street art, yes. This is a historically black community or community of color in the West Ward of Newark, New Jersey. In this particular community, we went there and asked that same question of the community. We said, what changes should we bring about? They said everything that you said. Everyone around the world in responding to this question says the same thing. But the thing that they prioritize that you have yet to say is that we want to see us there when those changes come. So it's not just about building the sidewalks or repairing the sidewalks, bringing in lighting, bringing in trees, streets, scape, et cetera, et cetera. It's about ensuring that the people you're doing the work for can enjoy the fruits of that investment. See, when people push back, supposedly, against these bike lanes, it isn't that they don't like bike lanes. I've done the research to prove that. What they're pushing back against is a future that doesn't include them. And so as you continue to do your renderings, engineers and planners, keep this in mind. Yes, it does matter that people are not only in the before picture, but also in the after picture. And I can't tell you how often engineers, particularly those white-led firms, do renderings that do not include people of color. And the sad thing is that they're doing this for those people. And so what this has led to, policy, system, and environmentally wise, is that we know in the States as well as here, transportation has been and continues to be weaponized as a tool of oppression within society. You can find that in the States in examples such as the highway robbery that took place in the historic Treme, or you can find any black and brown low-income community across America where an interstate highway system went through it and it bifurcated that community, destroyed that community. Now, people would say, are you telling me that was intentional? In most cases, yes. The government has even stated so. And so when we look at the transportation system, we have to understand what is happening in terms of climate. See, I survived Hurricane Katrina back in 2005 while living in Mississippi. I then moved to New Jersey in 2012 and survived Hurricane Sandy. No, hurricanes do not follow me. I just want to be clear. But what does follow me is seeing how people suffer before and after the hurricanes, and yet still not see the investment that is needed to right the wrong for those people. And so as we further look at transportation, what we find in terms of traffic crashes, without exception around the country, is that older adults, people of color, people walking in low-income communities are more likely to be struck and killed by a car while walking. And that is also true when we break it down and look specifically just among those groups. So looking at older adults, what we find is that those with a relative pedestrian danger their relative pedestrian danger for those over age 50 is more than a third higher than the general population. People of color, specifically during the time of 2008 and 2017, they were 72% more likely to have been struck and killed by drivers while walking. Now, you may not identify as an older person. Older people, raise your hand. Don't do that. People of color, it's proud to be old. It's a joke. We all hope we get older. And we need to start talking about how to age in place even more as well. That's a separate conversation, but an important one. The reason I bring that up is because whether you're an older person or a person of color, sometimes when we mention those two categories, you say, well, I can't relate. Well, what you can relate to, even here in Winnipeg, is that more than likely you are going to traverse through a low-income community. That's true in the States as well. And if so, those who are living in those neighborhoods where the median household income is $36,000 or less were killed at much higher rates than their counterparts. How many engineers do we have in the room? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm not going to tell you to keep them up. But your counterparts in the States, they saw this information. They see it all the time. Guess what their response was? It's behavioral. See, these people are being struck and killed because of their actions. That's in part true. We can agree to that. But that's not the full truth. They said it's behavior, it's all about the choices we make. Well, I'm here to show you that that is not the full truth. See, here's the truth. Yes, we can all agree that if you have risky behaviors, no matter the type, they'll lead to eventually disease and injury and ultimately one's mortality. But that is thinking too far downstream. We want to push engineers and others to think further upstream. In the upstream piece or perspective, which reveals the truth, states that the real thing that is happening is that one's living conditions influence one's behaviors. But even further upstream, it says that one's institutional inequities determine one's living conditions. But even further upstream, when we get to the root cause, we know that social inequities among race, class, gender, so on and so forth, and their bidirectional relationship to institutional inequities create the environment that influences the behavior, which ultimately leads to the mortality. And so if someone says the environment made me do it, believe them. And what else do we know about that then if that's the case? Well, there are equity implications. What ultimately happens is race and ethnicity determines place, which ultimately determines one's health. And now I live in the United States of America. I'm a former soldier. I am a very proud American, very proud. But here's the truth. We still live in a racially segregated society. And I want to prove that to you so it doesn't just appear to be, a conspiracy. Here are the facts. I want to invite you to Peoria, Illinois. I took a flight here from Chicago, so this isn't far away. Peoria, Illinois was ranked as the #1 most segregated school system in the country. It also ranked #6 in terms of the most racially segregated housing system in the US. When you look at this map, for my planners who are out there, blue represents where white people live predominantly. Purple represents where Hispanics live predominantly. Green, where Black or African Americans live. And then Asians are represented by the other colors. And so when you're looking at Peoria, you find that, of course, people or someone who lives in a white neighborhood would almost never go to a Black neighborhood. And a lot of the people in Black neighborhoods won't get an opportunity to go to an affluent white neighborhood. But if I show you just Peoria, you would say, well, that's episodic. That happens occasionally. I want to show you that this is a theme. It's more thematic than episodic. So I'm going to invite you to Detroit. Raise your hand if you've been to the Motor City. All right, it's making a comeback. See, if blue represents where the majority of people live there, white people live there, green for Black and purple for Hispanic, what do you see here? Scream it out. What do you see in the map? Same thing. Well, some people still won't believe that same thing, so we got to bring them to Houston, Texas. One of the largest metropolitan systems in America. But they still won't believe it, so we take them to Atlanta. You may recall during one of the last elections, they were waiting on votes from a certain part of Atlanta. That was the Black part of Atlanta. They knew when they got the votes from the southeast part of Atlanta, predominantly the votes were going to probably lean more towards Democratic. Doesn't mean that Black is synonymous with Democrat in the country, but they had a good idea that that would be the case. But you won't believe that this thing that I'm showing you exists until I take you to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. How can that be so in the nation's capital? We're united, they say. Well, I'll take you to New York City, the most progressive city in America on paper. But the reality is, it is still what? Racial residential segregation taking place there. And so usually when I'm before a crowd like this, people will say, are there any exceptions? I say, yes, go to Portland, Oregon, where there are no Black people. And so I love Portland, and that's a joke, right? There are some Black people, about 3, but the thing is that I'm showing you this because history doesn't say goodbye. History says, see you later. The stats I showed earlier were from a report done by Dangerous by Design probably 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. They just updated that. And here's the update. Nothing has changed. Those same people are dying disproportionately, are still being hit on our roadways. The regions that were represented 10, 15, 20 years ago, you can probably go back for as long as you can remember. The same places, the same people. Why can't we do something about it? Well, we've tried. And one of the things that have happened is that there are now a plethora, same here, plethora of state, federal, and local initiatives, plans, and policies aimed at increasing the physical activity and the access of Black and brown people. However, when I look at these policies through my lens, I know that the current description of these policies is ahistorical and it's apolitical. They don't want to touch the politics. But this is in particular regards to the history, systemic and institutional racism within the US. We also find that the strategies do not highlight the role of state and municipal law enforcement in discouraging and denying, as they do here, physical activity among the people of color here. Then we have, there's equitable and inclusive access that is listed usually as a foundational element in all of these plans, but not explicitly as a desired outcome or goal with a tangible organizational commitment. That is, to funding the organizations that are already doing the work. Then there's overwhelming data highlighting the sort of magnitude of unconscious bias and the criminalization of Blackness, of Indigenous in America as well as here. I can't tell you how many newspapers seeing how, First People are treated here, Indigenous First Peoples are treated. And it's really, really sad. It's really sad. But that's why we're here talking about it today. And then DEI is a big conversation, but we're not seeing people hold the organizations that they fund responsible for more DE&I. And so what they tell me is, hey, Charles, these are social determinants of health if you're in the health field. And I push back. I say, no, these are not social determinants of health. These are political determinants of health. And what this has led to, not just in the States, but also here in Canada, in Winnipeg specifically, is arrested mobility. Now, arrested mobility is this assertion that Black and other minorities have been historically and presently denied by legal systems and illegal systems, legal and illegal authority, their inalienable right to move, to be moved, or to simply exist in public space. And so what this has done and continues to do is result in adverse social, political, economic, and health effects that are widespread and intergenerational. And if you're looking for a framework for arrested mobility, I've created it here. In short, arrested mobility is a direct manifestation of racism across 4 distinct realms of racism. You have 1, the personal, 2, the interpersonal, 3, the institutional, and 4, the cultural realm. These collective realms of racism have resulted in the social construct of race. But that's not just locally here, that's also globally as well. And what this does is lead to the intentional and deliberate targeting and over-policing of Black and other racial and ethnic minorities. And this includes, when you look at arrested mobility, there's physical mobility, of which there's a direct relationship, and then there's social mobility, of which there's an indirect relationship. And so the question then becomes, how are these people in these communities over-policed? Well, you have to look at policing through a different lens. Think about it in terms of 4 key P's. The first 2 are policy and planning. Policy efforts, planning efforts can police one. The third way is law enforcement, whether at the provincial, in this case of the states, the federal, state, regional, or local law enforcement. And then lastly, anyone here named Karen, raise your hand. I need to apologize in advance. All right, no Karens, we're good. Ken, are you here? Sorry, Ken, if you're here. All right, so the last piece, or the last P is polity. And that refers to, as you all may know, as Karen and Ken. I hate that they chose those names. Sorry, Karen and Ken. But what this speaks about is, see, Karen and Ken have created a polity, which is a mindset, and leverage law enforcement policy and planning to weaponize it to arrest the mobility of Black and brown people. So it becomes a system that is constantly maintained and passed down. That is arrested mobility. That's a bold claim. Is there evidence to support arrested mobility across these different modes of transportation? Absolutely. And what I want to do is I want to start with walking. I invite you to these three cases. You may or may not know about them. The picture on the left is of who? Ahmaud Arbery. He was killed by a self-deputized individual. The other one in the middle is who? You all get our news, I see. That's good. You're following it. Trayvon Martin, self-deputized individual. And the last one is Mike Brown, who was killed by law enforcement. But it's not just about those cases. We're here to present a case. And the case, or the question for the case is, what does the evidence say? Well, when we look at the data, an analysis of 5 years of tickets issued to pedestrians in Jacksonville, Florida, revealed that 55% of the tickets were issued to Black individuals, even though only 29% of that population identifies as Blacks. Blacks were also 3 times more likely to receive a ticket than whites. And then residents of the city's 3 poorest zip codes were about 6 times as likely to receive a pedestrian citation. And if you're at the point in the presentation now where you want to grab your phone and Google Raquel Nelson, who is a Black single mother and college student. She lost her son in a hit and run while crossing the street to their apartment. What we know about that case is that the man who killed her son that day was later found and acquitted, admitted to drinking and taking painkillers on the night he killed her son. Now, in the case of her, she was convicted by an all-white jury of reckless conduct, improperly crossing a roadway, and second-degree homicide. When you review the case, you'll learn more. But when it comes to arrested mobility, I wish it ended there, because we would have something we could control. But it also includes cycling. And when you think about cycling, that's the sexiest of all modes. Cycling is by far the sexiest. Any cyclists here? See, I told you. No matter where you go, when you mention cycling, woo! Notice I said pedestrians, no one said anything, it's just silent. No one wants to be called pedestrian, right? So, but cyclists, they love it. I'm a cyclist and I also enjoy it, so I get it. But there are more than a dozen studies or reports on over-policing Black and ethnic, I would say Black and BIPOC mobility of biking in the US. And I've seen your studies here as well. When we look at the data in the States, though, this is alarming. I take you back to the southeast portion of the US. Between 2003 and 2015, Tampa police issued over 10,000 bicycle tickets. 79% of those were issued to Blacks, even though the population was only 26% of Tampa's population identified as Black. And during this 12-year study period, at least 142 bicycle tickets were issued to kids aged 15 and under, including children as young as 3 years old. We also find, when we go to Oakland, California, on the West Coast, 60% of all bicycle stops included Black cyclists. This was between the year of 2016, 2017, though the city of Oakland's population is also only about 25%. Then we find that in Chicago, we come to the Midwest. So you see, we start out in the Southeast, we're in the West, and now we're in the middle of America. In Chicago, twice as many bicycle citations are written in majority Black neighborhoods than in majority white or Latino neighborhoods. In fact, in Chicago, 321 tickets were issued in Austin, which is a low-income majority Black community, whereas only 5 were issued in Lincoln Park, a wealthy majority white community. And if you're at the point now where you're thinking maybe they were being more reckless, so on and so forth, there's no evidence to prove that. Which takes us to driving. And so we had Michelle came up and talked about increasing access to vehicles for everyone. That is critically important. The most recent and notable cases of over-policing Black mobility via driving in the U.S. included the murders of Fidel Castile and Sandra. But what does the data say? Well, a nationwide quantitative analysis of policing trends and traffic stops show that Black and Hispanic drivers are stopped disproportionately to white drivers, even though the hit rate of white and Black drivers are similar. We also find is that police are less likely to pull over Black drivers after dusk when the race of the driver is less obvious to police. And then when we go to Minnesota, which was the sort of epicenter of all things George Floyd in this country, what we find is that Blacks and Latinos were 7 times more likely to be stopped by police in white majority neighborhoods there. In fact, in 2016, 47% of the arrests by the St. Anthony Police Department in Minnesota were of Black individuals, even though the patrol area is only about 7% Black. Now, I'm giving you these stats in the context of the US. They're almost identical here. Just continue to do the research. But in the case of arrested mobility, I wish it ended there. Unfortunately, it does not. We also look at public transit, and one of the more notable cases of that happened in Oakland, California, including the murder of Oscar Grant III, who was a 22-year-old Black man who was murdered by a BART police officer in Oakland. That was actually turned into a movie. When we look at the stats there, what we find are Marshall Project analysis of New York Division of Criminal Justice Service data from 2014 showed that while the number of turnstile arrests have decreased significantly, what has not changed is who gets arrested. 89% of those arrested are Black or Hispanic. And when we look at the top 10 neighborhoods in New York, again, one of the most progressive cities in the world on paper, what we'd find is that those with the highest number of arrests per subway swipe were all predominantly Black or Hispanic. And if you're looking for something to Google there, check out Adrian Napier and his story, who was a Black teenager, was tackled and aimed at by 10 police officers for fare evasion. That fare was only $2.75. And then that takes us back to Portland, where Blacks were 8 times more likely than whites to be charged for certain transit violations in Portland, Oregon. Thankfully, Portland decided to decriminalize this in 2018. And so in the case of arrested mobility, we want it to end there, but it doesn't. It also includes ride sharing, as researchers from Stanford, MIT, and the University of Washington found that rideshare drivers discriminate based on race and gender. The stats show that of the 581 app-hailing trips recorded, Black travelers waited on average 20% longer than white travelers to have their ride accepted on Lyft or Uber. I can say I did not experience that here. You all had a lot of Uber who showed up within a matter of minutes. Maybe they were really desperate for passengers because they really showed up, and that's really great. One of the scary findings, though, when we look at this, is female travelers, on average, were driven 5% further than males, given the same start and finish location. So think about the safety implications of that. And this, though, is true, except in Winnipeg, I have not experienced this. Whether I'm wearing a suit or wearing a Black hoodie, anywhere else in the country, I would say I have been refused a cab. The data shows, too, that 55% of Blacks who responded to this study also have been refused a cab at some point. But in the case of arrested mobility, I wish it ended there. So arrested mobility also starts in our homes. The fact that we can't just simply exist in public space or rest fully. In the case of Breonna Taylor and the child who was killed playing in the yard of park, Tamir Rice. And so as I begin to wrap up and give you solutions here, the question is, what are the adverse social, political, economic, environmental, and health outcomes? What we know, and this happens here as well, when you start to look at the health outcomes, the social and the political outcomes. In the case of blacks, blacks are 54% less likely to be physically active than whites. So they're 54% less likely to be physically active. And that's regardless of the neighborhood or their individual income level. So it's not about working your way or earning your way out of this. Areas with larger black populations tend to have lower rates of upward mobility. When you arrest someone's physical mobility, you're arresting their opportunity for social or upward mobility. Then we find that transportation disadvantage also makes black people and other minorities more vulnerable to disenfranchisement efforts, like a lower density of polling places. Now, that is what is happening and continues to happen in the state. But as you know, that is happening here. There's racism in policing in Winnipeg. The First Nation experiences of the racism in policing survey report from 2021 reveal this. It was very challenging to read in terms of the pain I felt in reading the language of how people are treated here by law enforcement. You had a great study around police enforcement of cycling offenses, a case study in Winnipeg done by fantastic researchers. When we look at some of that data from the First Nations report, you could see that there's rude treatment, there's discriminatory questions. It did take me longer than expected to get in the country, I should say. The guy asked me more questions than I've ever been asked. And I couldn't think of, at the time, the Green Action Center. I just kept saying Green Center, Green Center. He was like, Green Center? Is there a purple center? Is there an orange center? It's like, no. He was asking a lot of questions. Maybe it was because I had on the black Chicago White Sox hat. I don't know. He may have been a Yankees fan. We'll see. Then there's racist language, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're at the point in the presentation where you start to say, okay, Charlie Brown, how can we create a safe, equitable, and inclusive system for all? This is where, if you really want to take pictures, you can. I'm going to go briefly through these, but I want to give you a new framework. And the question becomes, where do we start? Well, it starts with a justice-oriented framework. And that justice framework includes recognition justice, distributive justice, procedural justice, interactional justice, representational justice, and lastly, restorative justice. So what then is recognition justice? Oh, I forgot to mention care. What is recognition justice? It starts with, have you considered when you're doing these projects the damage inflicted by a lack of recognition and misrecognition? That takes you to an understanding then of the need for more distributive justice. Who has physical access to that street, to that park, or that trail? My research has shown, particularly as it relates to safe routes to school, is that most respondents do not feel that children are safe from traffic when bicycling in their neighborhoods. And as we think about racial and ethnic minorities, particularly those that are led by female-only households or that are female-only households, I grew up in one of those. I can tell you, if my mother didn't think it was safe for me to bike, it didn't matter what you say. I wasn't biking. So we got to make sure the neighborhoods are safer. My research also shows that nearly 1 in 4, 22%, feel that they can safely bicycle to local parks or trails from their homes. This was alarming considering that they were very close to parks and trails. But what does this tell you? It tells us that proximity is not access. Proximity to something is not access to something. It is a great measure, a good metric, but proximity is not access. There exists this social political environment that will make it difficult for one person to get there than the next, which takes us to procedural justice. As you're going about these plans and these programs, so on and so forth, who has influence over the designs, the operations, and the programming? See, procedural justice speaks to this idea of fair processes. Your process is not fair if it is not a process that is representative. I know this to be true because in the States, minority youth are not included in planning and transportation decision-making processes to the degree that they should be. Why is this unfortunate? Because they're more likely to be the people that die from those very decisions. The same is true here, which takes us to interactional justice. What makes people feel welcomed or unwanted in a space? See, interactional justice is about the degree to which people are treated with that dignity and the respect that you've shown me here. This is important because African Americans in the States are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement. And when we think about it through a gender lens, males reported being stopped at a rate 7 times that of females. So it's not just about building the system. Again, proximity is not access. It's about making sure that everyone can continue to have access to it as well. Which takes us to representational justice. Do people feel their experience and the history is represented in a space? This becomes increasingly important because I want you to think about how often, as we do development, redevelopment, so on and so forth, the historical and cultural erasure takes place in these communities. Which takes you to, lastly, the need for restorative justice. It could be as simple, even though this is expensive, but as simple as recapping a highway, such as what was done here. And so lastly, that takes us to care. How do people demonstrate their care for the space and other people in it? For all the men or those identifying as men in the room, this is important because our systems, whether you're aware or not, are biased against women, those identifying as women, and those of whom represents a religious minority group. So what should be done now? I'm going to give you 12 actions that can be done right now to undo this arresting of people's mobility, not just in the States, but here as well. Number one, no matter what happens, an organization is not serious about equity until they adopt a racial equity action plan. Notice I didn't say an equity action plan. Equity becomes so broad that you don't address the root cause, and the root cause in many cases is race and ethnicity. Discrimination is based solely on that in many cases. And so we have to create a racial equity action plan. Number two, they must prioritize safety investments, and they must do so in the underserved communities. And it's not just enough to do the investments of biking, walking, better access for that, but you also must have a maintenance plan. Because if you build it and you don't maintain it, you will return. Action three, equitable funding location. Ensure that the funding is allocated equitably, prioritizing local governments with less capacity. Notice I didn't say equally, equitably. Equitably is based on need and demand. Well, based on need. That takes us to four, capacity building programs. We have to develop programs to build a capacity of some of these smaller governments within the extended region here. Many of them are disadvantaged because they don't have the manpower, the capacity to compete for funding. Which takes us to action five, public transit and active transport. We must enhance and expand access in these transportation underserved communities. And if it's already there, we must look at ADA accessibility, we must look at lighting and other safety elements to ensure that, again, proximity isn't just access. Which takes us to action six, always prioritize community-driven solutions and implement them to ensure the full and fair participation of these groups. Which takes us to action number seven, education and awareness campaigns. It's imperative that we develop culturally relevant and linguistically accessible education and awareness campaigns. Which takes us to action eight. We need enforcement, yes, but it must be equity focused. We want to ensure that the safety resources and interventions are distributed equitably. Which takes us to number nine. We need, particularly here in Winnipeg, more data collection and analyses. Many of your tools currently are not taken into consideration, particularly traffic stops and so on and so forth, the race, the ethnicity of said persons. Who does that benefit? I think we know the answer. Action 10, equity audits and accountability. Once you've done it, you must conduct regular equity audits to assess the impact of these projects and policies on these different populations. So yes, once you do a good deed and make an investment or you implement a policy, go back and conduct equity audits through an independent party to ensure that you've met your goals or your targets. Which takes us to action number 11, fostering interagency collaboration. No one, no individual, no group, no government does it by themselves. We need to bring all the best minds to the table. We need to collaborate to get this done. Which takes us to action number 12. Sometimes you need a change in leadership. This is not a political statement. This is a political fact. You need to get some people out of office. I'll move on. That's important because I want to salute the city of Hoboken, New Jersey. Hoboken, New Jersey decided to conduct a bicycle master plan review or update to their master plan. They also did a Vision Zero action plan. They worked on those simultaneously. I was fortunate in my firm to help assist with both of those plans. That happens in many cities. The difference is Hoboken's mayor at the time trusted the people that worked for him to see the plan through. He hired the right consultants and street plans. And that plan didn't just sit on the shelf. They went to work, and they're continuously working. And here is how happy the mayor is now. You see him on the bike? See, when you're on a bike, you smile. He's happy not because he just did a plan, but they actually implemented that plan. And now the city of Jersey City, New Jersey can celebrate being one of the first cities in America to not have a fatality on the streets that they own and maintain. That's what leadership looks like. But once you do all of this, I caution you that you must be prepared for gentrification and displacement. So you want to work proactively to evaluate and mitigate the unintended consequences of this improved mobility and access. Because once people have it, everyone wants it. And this is important because, as we say in the Black Barbershop, trees planted in minority communities mature just in time for gentrification to take place. And so many people then say, well, Charlie Brown, we get it. You've talked enough. We're in the same boat. And I tell you, I love you, but no, we're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm. There's a huge difference. My boat has had a hole in it for a very long time. And so what I hear from First people, what I hear from Indigenous people, what I hear from Black and Brown people around the world is they are tired. In the case of Black people, specifically in America, they are so tired. They are tired because we can't go jogging. We can't ask for help after being in a car crash. We can't walk from home from the corner store. We can't walk home with Skittles. We can't break down on a public road with car problems. We can't have a disabled vehicle. We can't be a 10-year-old walking with our grandfather. We can't run. We can't breathe. We can't live. Because our mobility has been arrested. And that is true whether we're talking about my grandmother in a wheelchair or my sister on her bicycle. Thank you for your time. The Arrested Mobility book will be published hopefully around this May. If you're interested in receiving a signed copy of that or advanced copy, scan this code and send me an email. Thank you so much. All right.
I just want to thank Charles for coming today, for talking with us. We have some time now for questions. I saw many people taking notes down and arms going up already. So we'll jump right into questions. First hand was right in the back.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. Firstly, I think increasing one's awareness can certainly, help them articulate and develop the vernacular to explain their conditions. I would say even more acutely, and resonate with the jargon that we use in our industry. So raising awareness, helping people see the power of data collection, not just quantitative data, but also qualitative data. Their stories are powerful. Their stories need to be told. They may also recognize the need to identify a truth teller. They may be the one collecting the data. They may not be the person that is telling the story. So that speaks to the need for partnerships and alignment with the right individuals and the right groups. I also think we need to acknowledge or reassure people that we hear them, we see them, and that they're not crazy. This thing that they're feeling that I had trouble describing for most of my career until it hit me that it was arrested mobility is a real thing. And I wanted to diagnose it because I felt once we had a name and a diagnosis, then we can prescribe a solution. And so they are experiencing arrested mobility. Their mind is not playing tricks on them. It's real. Um, as a white identifying person, if you are one, I think it's important that you leverage your power, your access to resources, your partnerships, your friendships towards helping people elevate their own communities. That doesn't mean that you got to be there for the photo op. It means that you are a silent partner sometimes. Um, Lastly, I would probably say one of the more powerful things one can do is provide one access to education. Education isn't a cure-all, um, but if there's a young kid that you know has potential and you want to make an investment in something, please make an investment in that kid's future. Educational access is key. So those are some things. And then lastly, mentorship. I would not be where I'm at without mentorship. And my mentorship, I call on my board of directors, is around 12 women and men of different ages, different sectors, who I'm accountable to on a quarterly basis. So having some level of accountability and access to people who've lived the experience that I ultimately want to live has been transformative for me. And also connecting with your peers around the globe. We have the access to do that now. Oftentimes we limit it, in a very micro way. And, you get caught up in the day to day. But there are solutions outside of where you live. You just have to have the fortitude to seek it. So those are my recommendations. Yeah, so I mentioned the city of Oakland and showing the disparities in police stops there, but the city of Oakland, California has a really good racial equity action plan. On a regional level, SCAG is the acronym, SCAG, which stands for the Southern California Association of Governments. They're the largest metropolitan planning organization in the country, in the US. They have a racial equity baseline report and a racial equity action plan. I've been serving as an advisor to them as a consultant for a number of years. They do it probably better than anyone else. Now, with that being said, for both of those entities, there's still a lot of room for improvement, of which they would admit. Boeing even has a racial equity action plan. So if you're looking for examples, those will probably be the three to look to just for guidance. Um, I just caution, please don't duplicate for the sake of duplication. You want to contextualize your equity plan as well. It's a good question. It's a great question. I think I started the presentation by stating I'm not anti-police. I'm against over-policing. Um, I also know from a data perspective that wherever you target with your data collection is where you can show um, certain things happening more so than in other places. For instance, if you put a traffic camera predominantly in Black and brown communities, your data is probably going to say Black and brown communities are speeding disproportionately because of the placement of it. When it comes to bike theft, um, maybe it's not bike theft, and I don't want to minimize it. Maybe it's they've privatized the bicycle. What I mean by that is there's scarcity. They have a need, and they decided to take the bicycle out of you know, great need, not intent to control it and keep it forever, but to use it momentarily. And so perhaps what that speaks to is the need for a bike share system, an e-scooter system, public transit, and so on and so forth that is more accessible to everyone and doesn't cost an arm and a leg for people to use. So instead of spending all of our tax dollars on expanding our roadways, perhaps we invest in those systems. Everyone has access to a bike. They have no need to steal it, or as I say, privatize it. Okay, but I want you to understand that while that could be true, that is true based on your experience. That's not true based on the experiences of all Canadians, nor all people in Winnipeg. You want to have a process that is representative, that leads ultimately to a distribution of resources that ultimately restore the community that was most impacted. On the record, I'm a huge advocate for disability rights and justice, without question. Um, the presentations that I do, the friendships that I share among people of whom have disabilities, whether temporarily or permanently, and not just the physical disabilities. My wife teaches autism. I have a friend. I won't get into like how when you ask people about racism, they talk about their friends. I just want to let you know that I'm a huge disability rights and justice person. When we're having a conversation, though, and we're talking about, because I don't like to pair those things against each other, like you can only choose one, you don't have to focus just on one. My message is that you start with racial and ethnic equity. The reason why is because when you look within the disabilities community, race is still a factor, right? You can probably tell me that when you look just among that group, those of whom are black and brown, particularly those who are black, brown, and low income, are still suffering at a disproportionate rate relative to the disability population, particularly as it relates to those of whom are white and disabled versus those of whom are black and disabled. So racism isn't just a thing for the general society. Racism is very much present within the disability community as well. And so if that is true, then by tackling racial equity or racial and ethnic equity, you are lifting up the disability communities as a whole because those are the groups of whom are most impacted. And so that's why you do it. When you look at gender, the same thing can be said. Um, so whatever sort of context you look in, the black, the brown, the low income suffer the most. And so that's why I'm starting with the root cause. It's not exclusive of, white persons with disabilities and other groups of whom are disabled, but it's focusing on those who have the greatest need at the time. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, so gentrification has a negative connotation. The real key or the real focus here is avoiding displacement. Because in some communities, gentrification is beautification. And these communities are not opposed to the beautification that happens. So let's be clear about that. When we talk about gentrification and displacement, you have to look at it on a spectrum. And the question becomes, where is your community on the spectrum? Are you in the before stage of gentrification? Are you in the mid stage? Or is it just simply late or too late? If you're in the before stage, it's about coalition building. It's about rights to purchase. It's about community land trusts, if you have those here as well. It's about zoning. Zoning is a big policy that has to be addressed, particularly inclusionary zoning, allowing different types of residential uses. I've seen limited equity co-op housing, and then lastly, community benefit agreements, working with developers to ensure that, persons can remain in place. That's the before stage. If you feel like in your community you're at mid stage, you want to go ahead and strengthen rental protections so that there isn't a great sort of, I would say, a condominium conversion that takes place. But one of the biggest things you could do too is simply give people the funding to rehabilitate and preserve their existing ownership. A lot of black, brown people lack access to capital, and that lack of access to capital is a systemic racist issue as well. And then there's last stage gentrification, which is about dealing with the NIMBYism that happens, or employer assisted housing. So if people are coming in, there's no reason why they couldn't provide more homes for the people working in that area as well. So it really depends on before, mid, or late stage gentrification and displacement that you're talking about regarding what strategy or policy you could use. I'm a huge fan of it. I think it should be done across North America. Yes, Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, Virginia. There's free public transit there, and it is proven to be successful. I don't know the intricate details. What I do know, and this is the most important thing, is free to the user. Yeah, I don't know the Brazil example. Um, I think I've seen that BRT and all of that in Brazil, but I don't know the actual place, so I don't want to give a name. But Richmond, Virginia. I say Richmond, Virginia because if Richmond can do it, Winnipeg can. No disrespect, Richmond. Yeah, it's an issue that is, I think, a global one in many respects. I mean, we certainly still want the white people that show up to show up. Um, so my comments are not excluding their participation. I think it's important because at a minimum, it places some level of concern on the city representative to be prepared for those residents. So that's at least one positive in that. And also that's their civic right to do so. So salute to them. But they can get in the way, that is true. I think it's a matter of who you have facilitating the public meeting. I think many city planners, particularly those in government, can be a little more skilled in how they manage a crowd and a conversation. So perhaps some professional development there, get accustomed to that, especially as it relates to conflict resolution, so on and so forth. Um, that's one thing that we didn't get in our trainings, right? Like how to actually do it. We were told what strategies work, but we need more training in the field, hostile crowds. Another thing is when you meet, where you meet, at what time you meet, at what language you're speaking. And then the big elephant in the room is the organizational entity that you're representing. See, sometimes we forget the organization that you're now coming to say you're doing something good on behalf of has a history with that community where they remember the bad that you've done. And so to overcome that, you yourself need to form a relationship with said community. So shop there, run there, bike there, get your hair cut there, get to know the people, ultimately serve the people outside of your 9 to 5, and you'll have the respect, you'll be honored in a way that I think helps you get towards your goal. So your job, this isn't 9 to 5 for me. This is what I live and breathe. And I think that's authentic, and it perceived as authentic when I go in any neighborhood, anywhere. I've earned my stripes. And so get to know the people. And if that doesn't work, in the same way that we pay consultants, I am one, so no disrespect to consultants, to lead and facilitate these meetings, hire from within the community, pay them, incentivize them to host meetings on their own terms. They are trusted advocates and they can go much further than we can. And if you're looking for an example of that, the US government just put in their plan, there are ways in which you can incentivize community for participating in these public meetings. I don't have the specific details before me, nor am I a US government representative, so I just want to put that out there. Yeah, so I think all cities across the world that are advancing greater access to micromobility options, to bicycles, to public transit, to green buses. Any push from a policy standpoint to make communities more walk friendly, more bike friendly, 15-minute cities, so on and so forth, um, I think are doing that. They're not just calling it unarresting mobility. That's from the infrastructure investment side. Also, communities that are pushing back against discriminatory enforcement and sort of penalizing this sort of racist actions by police officers are moving towards that as well. And the reason why I say that is because it matters not if you have an infrastructure that allows for greater mobility, but the enforcement is counter to that. Like it's restricting certain groups from enjoying it. So the more people we have biking, the more people we have walking, using public transit, or again, other forms of micromobility, I think they can help us reach our climate goal. A big push that I'm a part of in the US is electrifying every school bus in America. So the communities that are doing that, that's a big push as well. So they may not use the same language we're using at the same time in which we're using it, but any system, any city that's working on that holistically, I think is trying to achieve the goal that you said in unison in the way that you said it. The ones that I will name, and of course this always gets you in trouble because none of them are perfect. I would say Denver, Colorado is doing a great job, particularly the program they used just recently to incentivize electric bicycles for residents. I'm not going to mention that one. Portland is doing great as well. Their bike share system is predominantly, I would say, is it very accessible for low-income Black and Brown communities there. Washington, D.C. is a great example. New York City as well. But none of those places are perfect. I just want to reemphasize that. We can throw in Winnipeg. Winnipeg, though, I would grade on the curve and say, Winnipeg, you're on your way. Don't give up. Facts don't work against a fact-resistant person. You know, that just doesn't work. I had a joke about that. I want to be serious, so I won't say the joke. I mean, I avoid. There are some people you cannot convince. You have to accept that for your own mental health and well-being. But you also have to explore at some point, why do they hold on to their truth so firmly? What we oftentimes do is when there's any sort of conflict or tension, we go in our separate ways. The way I deal with it is inviting those people out to lunch or dinner or to coffee to really understand what is at the heart of their belief, because it's quite possible that I'm missing something. So you ask, what do? I first check myself. I humbly state that I don't know everything. So maybe this person has access to information I don't have access to. I'll only know that if I'm willing to sit down with you. And in the States and here as well, too often, when someone is politically or socio-politically opposed to us, we don't want to talk to them. I think the solution is to talk. Talking doesn't mean you have to convince them to believe otherwise, but talking at least acknowledges them as a human being and lets everyone know that you're willing to seek out the solution without feeling like you're just all stuck in your world neither. So what I do is I break bread with people. And what I found is that if my bread is better than theirs, I usually form allies. And so that's one way to do it. Outside of that, continue to walk the other way. Because there are some people, let's say 0.001%, who you'll never convince. Everyone else, I think maybe you can convince them. But it may not be you, the messenger. you may have to find a person that has some other alignment with them that is the messenger. That's another strategy. There's a great, I'm thinking about politics back in the US, so before I say something, ding, something comes off like, oh, don't say that. There's a person in the US who said once, the only way to be free is to own your own. That's paraphrasing it. One meaning that's why I created Equitable Cities. I found that in other systems and institutions and entities that were created in which I was in service of faithfully, I always came against a roadblock. And the roadblock was around the value and the importance I placed on addressing inequities. They always felt, to a degree, an uneasiness around speaking so boldly around like racism, even in the States. What you have to do, I start my presentation with the little me there, because that's when I feel like I was in my purest form. I was not blinded by other people's expectations of me. I was a dreamer. So I go back to that little guy, that little person inside of me, and ask him, you know, who am I? What did I love? What did I want to focus on the most? And in that conversation with him, I find my fearlessness. I also can rely on the fact that I grew up extremely poor in Mississippi, like extremely poor. I'm like, what could they possibly take from me? I started with nothing in terms of a money situation. So can they take my money? Can they take my job? Yes. Could they take my life? Yes. But I willingly participated in the United States Army, devoting my life towards advancing a democracy that values people's voice, their uniqueness, one that didn't hopefully other them in the way in which we've been othered. So in taking my life, that wouldn't have been something that I'm fearful of neither. And so once you reach that point where the thing that you care most about, you're willing to die for, you've arrived. And it's at that point, you're gonna find your tribe. You're gonna find people, other light seekers from around the world who are gonna pour into you and give you the confidence and the reassurance that you need that this thing that you're fighting is all that matters for you at this time. And so continue to seek that light, and when the time is right, you'll know when to jump, figuratively. That's it. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much.